The cafe hummed with a faint, familiar rhythm, the kind that comes with an afternoon lull. The smell of freshly brewed espresso mingled with the sugary scent of pastries, a comforting aroma for most. But for Dana, it was just another reminder of the endless hours she spent on her feet, running between tables, taking orders, and cleaning up after customers who barely acknowledged her existence. It wasn't the glamorous life she'd once envisioned for herself, but it was her reality now, a reality made heavier by mounting bills and the unrelenting pressure of simply trying to survive. Dana glanced at the clock on the wall. 1 hour to go. The hands seemed to drag, mocking her exhaustion. Rent was due in 2 days, and her phone bill had been sitting unpaid for over a week. Tips that day had been abysmal, mostly loose change tossed onto tables without a second thought. She bit her lip, trying not to let the frustration show on her face as she wiped down the last table by the window. Her manager, a weary woman with lines etched deep into her face, gave Dana a small, encouraging nod from behind the counter. It was the kind of look that said, "Hang in there," though it offered little comfort. Dana sighed, pulling her hair into a tighter ponytail and grabbing her order pad. She was on autopilot now, her movements mechanical and precise. The routine had become her lifeline, a way to keep her mind from wandering too far into the dark places she tried to avoid. She had no time to think about what could have been or how things might have turned out differently. Her focus was on getting through the next hour, the next shift, the next week. The bell above the door jingled, breaking her thoughts. Instinctively, Dana turned toward the sound, her pen poised over her pad. A young man entered, his presence commanding attention despite his simple attire. He was tall and lean, dressed in a plain shirt and slacks that looked effortlessly put together. Two other men followed closely behind him, their sharp eyes scanning the cafe with a vigilance that felt out of place in such a modest setting. Dana's brow furrowed slightly. This wasn't the kind of place that attracted high-profile guests, and yet something about the trio's demeanor screamed importance. For a brief moment, Dana froze, her mind scrambling to place the young man's face. There was something strikingly familiar about him, his sharp features, the calmness in his expression, the way he carried himself. Then it clicked. Barron Trump. She'd seen his face on the news countless times, though he looked older now, more mature. Her heart skipped a beat, but she quickly reminded herself to stay professional. He was just another customer, no more, no less. Summoning her best smile, Dana approached the table where Barron had settled. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "Can I get you something to start?" Barron looked up, and for a split second, Dana felt as though the air had been knocked out of her. His eyes were calm but piercing, his expression polite yet reserved. "I'll just have a cappuccino," he said, his voice soft and measured. "And maybe one of those croissants." "Absolutely. Anything else?" she asked, her pen hovering over the pad. He shook his head. "That'll be perfect. Thank you." Dana scribbled the order down, nodding briskly. "Coming right up." She turned toward the counter, willing her hands to stop trembling. "Why am I acting like this?" she thought, annoyed with herself. He was just a customer, after all. A customer with a high-profile last name, sure, but still just a person ordering coffee and a pastry. At the counter, Dana busied herself preparing the cappuccino, her movements deliberate and methodical. The hiss of the steam wand filled the quiet cafe as she frothed the milk, her focus narrowing to the task at hand. Still, she couldn't help but steal glances toward the corner table where Barron sat. He wasn't scrolling through his phone like most patrons or typing away on a laptop. Instead, he stared out the window, seemingly lost in thought. His posture was straight but not stiff, his demeanor calm but not detached. There was a certain weight to his presence that Dana couldn't quite put her finger on. As she balanced the tray with the cappuccino and croissant, Dana took a deep breath and approached his table. "Here you go," she said, carefully setting the items down in front of him. Barron looked up and offered a faint smile. "Thank you." You're welcome, Dana replied, her tone polite but neutral. Let me know if you need anything else. As she turned to walk away, she felt the weight of his gaze lingering on her, though it wasn't intrusive. It was a quiet curiosity, almost as if he were trying to read her. Dana brushed the thought aside and returned to her duties, clearing empty tables and refilling sugar containers. The cafe had grown quieter, the hum of conversation replaced by the soft strains of background music playing through the speakers. Out of the corner of her eye, Dana noticed Barron pulling a pen from his pocket. He leaned over the receipt, scribbling something quickly before folding the paper neatly and tucking it beneath his empty coffee cup. Then he stood, gathering his coat and phone. Dana watched him out of the corner of her eye, trying not to make it obvious. "Thank you for coming," she called out softly as he passed by. Barron turned back slightly, offering another faint smile. "Have a good day," he said, his tone warm but reserved. The bell above the door jingled again as he exited, his security close behind. The room fell silent once more, the only sound the faint clink of dishes being washed in the back. Dana exhaled slowly, her heart still fluttering from the strange interaction. She grabbed her tray and made her way over to clear the table. The cappuccino cup was empty, save for a thin residue of foam clinging to the rim. The croissant plate held nothing but crumbs. And then there was the receipt. Dana picked it up, her fingers brushing against the folded paper. She hesitated for a moment, her mind racing with possibilities. Was it a generous tip? A polite thank you? Her breath hitched as she unfolded the receipt, the words scrawled in neat handwriting making her stomach drop. At the bottom of the receipt was a tip. 4 digits, an amount that made her hands tremble. But it wasn't the money that struck her. Above it, written in Barron's steady hand, were the words, "Your kindness and hard work don't go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." Dana's knees felt weak as she read the note again, slower this time, letting each word sink in. Her vision blurred as hot tears filled her eyes. It wasn't about the money, though the tip would undoubtedly help with her bills. It was the words, the empathy, the acknowledgement. For the first time in what felt like months, maybe even years, Dana felt seen. She stumbled into the empty chair across from where Barron had sat, clutching the receipt in her trembling hands. A single thought echoed in her mind. Why did he notice me? Dana sat in the chair, her hands trembling as she held the receipt, reading the note over and over again. The words blurred as fresh tears filled her eyes, her mind reeling. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming. The message felt like a lifeline, thrown to her at the exact moment she needed it most. It wasn't just the kindness of the gesture. It was the fact that someone, especially someone like him, had taken the time to notice her. She barely noticed when her manager, Lisa, approached her. "Hey," Lisa said gently, her voice laced with concern. "You okay? What happened?" Dana wiped at her eyes hastily with the back of her hand, embarrassed to be caught in such an emotional moment. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice cracked slightly. She hesitated, then added, "It's just a really generous tip." Lisa raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Generous enough to make you cry?" Dana nodded, managing a shaky laugh as she handed over the receipt. Lisa's eyes widened as she scanned the total, her mouth dropping open slightly. "No way," she whispered, her tone full of disbelief. Her gaze dropped to the note, and for the first time in months, Dana saw something soften in her manager's usually weary eyes. "Wow," Lisa murmured, handing the receipt back with a reverence that made Dana clutch it tightly again. "That's something else." Dana nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't even know why he wrote it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't do anything special." Lisa studied her for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes people just know," she said finally. They can see what you're going through, even when you think you're hiding it. You're here every day, working your tail off, always kind to customers, even the ones who don't deserve it. Maybe he saw that. Dana's throat tightened, and she blinked rapidly, trying to keep the tears at bay. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words. For months, she'd been running on empty, pushing herself to the limit just to stay afloat. She'd skipped meals to stretch her grocery budget, taken double shifts to make rent, and used every ounce of her strength to be kind to customers, even on days when kindness felt impossible. She'd thought no one noticed, but somehow he had. As the cafe quieted again, Dana tucked the note carefully into her apron pocket, as though it were a fragile treasure. She went back to clearing tables and refilling sugar containers, her movements slower but lighter, as if a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying had been lifted. Still, the words lingered in her mind, repeating like a mantra, "Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." By the time her shift ended, the cafe felt smaller, the room tinged with a strange buzz she couldn't quite place. A couple of co-workers whispered by the pastry display, glancing toward the corner table where Barron had sat. It was clear that word of his visit and his generous tip was already spreading. Dana didn't know how to feel about that. Part of her wanted to keep the moment private, to hold on to it like a secret meant just for her. But another part of her, a quieter, more vulnerable part, felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. As she untied her apron and prepared to leave, Lisa caught her arm. "Hey," she said softly. "You know, this kind of thing doesn't happen every day. What he wrote, it's special. Don't downplay it." Dana nodded, her lips curving into a small, grateful smile. "Thanks, Lisa," she said, her voice steadier now. She slipped the folded receipt into her bag, making sure it was secure before heading out the door. The walk to the subway station was quiet, the city's usual noise fading into the background as Dana's thoughts swirled. She couldn't stop replaying the moment in her mind, Barron's calm demeanor, the sincerity in his tone, the quiet way he'd left without drawing attention to himself. He hadn't done it for recognition. That much was clear. And yet, his gesture had felt monumental, like a lifeline thrown into the deep waters she'd been treading for far too long. As she boarded the train, Dana pulled the receipt from her bag and stared at it again. Her fingers traced the words, as if she needed the physical connection to believe it was real. "My family has been where you are." That line stuck with her more than anything. It was a reminder that even someone like Barron Trump, someone from a world of wealth and privilege, could understand struggle. It was a reminder that everyone, no matter their background, carried their own battles. Dana leaned back against the seat, clutching the note tightly. For the first time in weeks, maybe even months, she allowed herself to believe that things could get better. She whispered the words under her breath, as though saying them aloud would make them real. Brighter days are coming. But as the train rumbled through the dark tunnels, Dana had no idea that this small, private moment was about to become very public. She didn't know that the note wouldn't stay a secret for long. The next morning, Dana awoke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly on her nightstand. She groaned, rolling over and squinting at the screen. Dozens of notifications lit up the display, messages pouring in faster than she could read them. Her heart sank as she opened the first one. "Is this you? OMG, you're famous!" Another message followed, then another, each one echoing the same sentiment. Dana sat bolt upright, her pulse quickening. One message included a link, and her stomach dropped as she clicked it. A news headline stared back at her. Barron Trump leaves waitress touching note and huge tip. Internet reacts. The article detailed her interaction with Barron almost word for word. And there it was, a photo of the note, the words she had clung to now shared with the world. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the article. "How did this happen?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Another message from a coworker gave her the answer. "Someone at the cafe must have snapped a picture. It's everywhere now." Her social media feeds were flooded with posts, comments, and debates. Strangers speculated about her life, her struggles, her emotions, all without knowing her. Some praised Barron's kindness, while others questioned his motives. And amidst it all, Dana felt exposed, as though her private moment of solace had been stripped away and put on display for the entire world to dissect. She dropped her phone onto the bed and buried her face in her hands. "What do I do now?" she thought, the weight of the attention pressing down on her like a physical force. But before she could spiral further, a soft cough from the next room reminded her of why she couldn't afford to lose herself in the chaos. Her mom, the bills, the life she was still fighting to keep afloat. Dana took a deep breath, steeling herself. Whatever happened next, she wasn't ready for it. But for now, she would hold on to the note, the words that had felt like a lifeline, and remind herself of the promise they carried. Brighter days were coming. She just had to believe it. Dana stepped into the cafe the next morning, her head down and her heart pounding. She'd spent the entire subway ride trying to ignore the flood of notifications on her phone, the constant buzzing that reminded her of the whirlwind waiting for her. The article, the comments, the messages, they'd all followed her like a shadow. She wasn't ready to face the world's sudden interest in her life, but she didn't have much of a choice. Bills didn't stop for viral fame. As soon as she pushed open the cafe door, she felt it. The shift. The space felt smaller somehow, charged with a buzz of attention that wasn't there before. Her co-workers were already whispering by the pastry display, their eyes darting toward her as if she were a celebrity. A couple of regulars looked up from their coffee cups, their expressions a mix of curiosity and awe. Dana could feel their gazes following her as she tied her apron and stepped behind the counter. "You're a local hero now," Lisa teased, her voice light but her eyes warm with pride. Dana forced a smile, shaking her head. "I don't feel like one," she muttered, tying her apron tighter to give her hand something to do. "You should," Lisa said, placing a reassuring hand on Dana's shoulder. "What happened yesterday was special. Not everyone gets to be part of something like that." Dana swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the floor. She didn't feel special. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like the world was dissecting her every move, her every thought, without even knowing who she really was. And Barron, he hadn't done any of it for the attention. She was certain of that. But now, the note, the tip, the words that had felt so personal, they were everywhere. By mid-morning, the buzz in the cafe had reached a fever pitch. Customers who'd barely glanced at her before were now smiling at her, offering words of encouragement, even leaving slightly larger tips than usual. Dana appreciated the kindness, but it all felt surreal, like she was watching someone else's life unfold from the outside. It wasn't until Lisa leaned in close, her voice low, that Dana realized just how big the story had become. "There's a news crew outside," she said, nodding toward the window. "They've been parked there for an hour." Dana froze, her stomach twisting into a knot. "You're kidding," she said, though she already knew Lisa wasn't. "They want to talk to you," Lisa continued, her tone careful. "They've been asking about the note, about Barron. I told them you were busy, but—" Dana didn't let her finish. "I'm not talking to them," she said quickly, the words spilling out in a rush. "I can't." Lisa studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Okay," she said simply. "But if you change your mind, let me know." Dana ducked behind the counter, trying to keep her breathing steady. She didn't have the energy to face reporters, let alone the endless questions they'd throw at her. She glanced at her phone, which had been vibrating incessantly in her pocket. More notifications, more messages. She reluctantly unlocked the screen and skimmed the latest headlines. "Kindness in action. Barron Trump's note goes viral. A struggling waitress receives the tip of a lifetime. Small gestures, big impact." The story behind the viral note. The comments were even more overwhelming. "This is what the world needs more of. Barron Trump seems like such a kind soul. Waitress stories always get me. I hope she's okay. Dana's chest tightened. Strangers were debating her story, analyzing her life as if they knew her. Some questioned Barron's motives, others speculated about her financial situation, and a few even criticized the gesture, calling it a publicity stunt. It was too much. She dropped her phone onto the counter and buried her face in her hands, the weight of it all threatening to crush her. "You okay?" one of her co-workers asked, startling her out of her thoughts. Dana forced a weak smile. "Yeah, I'm fine," she lied. But she wasn't fine. She felt like her world was spinning out of control, and she didn't know how to stop it. The reporters outside weren't going anywhere. By lunchtime, they were still camped near the entrance, their cameras and microphones a constant reminder of the attention she desperately wanted to avoid. Dana kept her head down, focusing on her tasks, but she could feel their presence like an invisible weight pressing against her. "Hey, you served him, right?" one of her coworkers asked, her voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. "Barron Trump? What was he like?" Dana hesitated, unsure how to respond. "He was nice," she said finally, keeping her tone neutral. "Really polite." The coworker beamed. "That's so cool. I'd freak out if I had to serve someone famous." Dana didn't respond. She didn't want to explain the note, the tip, the moment that had meant so much to her. Somehow, sharing it felt like taking something sacred and putting it on display. It wasn't about the money or the fame. It was about the words, the quiet kindness of a stranger who had noticed her when she thought she was invisible. By the time her shift ended, Dana felt like she could barely breathe. She untied her apron and slipped out the back door, avoiding the reporters still lingering out front. The cool air hit her like a slap, and she exhaled shakily, grateful for the reprieve. But the weight in her chest remained, the overwhelming sense that her life was no longer entirely her own. As she walked home, her phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, it was from Lisa. "Call me. They want you on the morning show." Dana stopped in her tracks, staring at the screen. Her stomach churned at the thought of going on television, of sitting in front of cameras and answering questions about her life. She wasn't ready for that. She didn't want her face plastered on screens across the country. But at the same time, a small voice whispered in the back of her mind, "Wouldn't it be nice to tell your side of the story? To explain what the note really meant?" She shook her head, shoving the phone back into her pocket. The decision could wait. For now, all she wanted was to get home, to escape the noise and the attention, to find a moment of quiet where she could breathe. When she finally walked through the door of her apartment, her mom was sitting in her recliner, flipping through television channels. Dana barely had time to drop her bag before she heard her mom's voice. "That's you, isn't it?" her mom asked, her gaze fixed on the screen. Dana froze. On the TV was a blurred photo of the note, along with a headline, "A quiet act of generosity sparks national conversation." "Yeah," Dana said softly, her voice barely audible. "That's me." Her mom's eyes softened and she gestured for Dana to sit beside her. "It's a good thing, you know," she said gently. "People need stories like this." Dana sighed, folding her arms tightly across her chest. "I didn't ask for it," she muttered. "I didn't want all this attention." "Sometimes the good things find you when you're not looking for them," her mom replied, reaching out to squeeze Dana's hand. "What he wrote, that was special, and people are talking about it because they need to believe there's still kindness in the world." Dana swallowed hard, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. Her mom was right. The note wasn't just about her, it was about hope, about reminding people that even in the darkest moments, kindness could still shine through. But as much as she wanted to believe that, Dana couldn't shake the feeling that the attention was too big, too overwhelming for someone like her. The world had noticed her, and now she had to figure out how to face it. Dana spent the night tossing and turning, her thoughts swirling like a storm. The viral story had taken on a life of its own, and no matter how much she tried to shut it out, it crept into every corner of her mind. Her phone buzzed constantly, lighting up with messages, headlines, and social media notifications. She couldn't bring herself to read them anymore. Each comment felt like another layer of exposure, peeling away the small pieces of privacy she had left. Morning came too soon. As the first rays of sunlight peeked through her apartment window, Dana groaned, rolling over to silence her alarm. Her phone buzzed again. A new message from Lisa. Producers from the morning show called. They really want to hear from you. Think about it, Dana. This could be a good thing. Dana stared at the screen, her heart sinking. The idea of going on television, sitting in front of cameras, and having her life dissected by strangers made her stomach churn. She wasn't built for the spotlight. She was just a waitress trying to get by, not a public figure with a story to share. But then, her eyes drifted to her bag, where Barron's note was still tucked safely inside. The words felt heavier now, weighted with meaning she hadn't fully grasped before. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming. With a deep breath, Dana pushed herself out of bed and shuffled into the kitchen, where her mom was already sitting in her recliner, a mug of tea in hand. The morning news played softly in the background, the familiar anchor's voice cutting through the quiet. And in a heartwarming story making waves this week, Barron Trump's act of generosity toward a struggling waitress has captured the nation's attention, the anchor said. Dana froze in the doorway, her breath catching in her throat, as the screen displayed a blurred photo of the note. The story has sparked conversations about kindness and the impact of small gestures. Her mom looked up, a knowing smile on her face. "It's everywhere, huh?" she said, her voice gentle. Dana nodded, sinking into the chair across from her. "I don't know what to do, Mom," she admitted, her voice shaky. "It's all so overwhelming." Her mom reached out, placing a comforting hand on Dana's knee. "I know it feels like a lot," she said softly. "But maybe this is happening for a reason. People need stories like this. It gives them hope." "But it's not about me," Dana protested, her voice rising slightly. "It was his gesture, his kindness. I don't want people thinking I'm some kind of hero. I didn't do anything special." Her mom shook her head, her expression patient but firm. "You don't have to be a hero, Dana. But you can be honest. You can share what it meant to you. That note, those words, they mattered. And maybe if you tell your story, it'll remind people that kindness still exists." Dana swallowed hard, her chest tightening. Her mom's words made sense, but the idea of putting herself out there still felt impossibly daunting. She didn't feel ready. But then again, when was anyone ever ready for something like this? The day passed in a blur. Dana went through her shift at the cafe on autopilot, dodging questions from customers and co-workers alike. The reporters were still outside, their cameras and microphones a constant reminder of the world's gaze. Dana avoided them as best as she could, slipping out the back door during her break and keeping her head down whenever she had to cross the main floor. By the time her shift ended, she was emotionally drained. As she walked home, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Lisa. "They want an answer by tonight. Let me know." Dana stared at the message for a long moment, her mind racing. The thought of going on a morning show still terrified her, but her mom's words echoed in her ears. Maybe this is happening for a reason. She glanced down at her bag, where the note rested like a quiet reminder of everything she'd been through. When she finally reached her apartment, Dana pulled out her phone and dialed Lisa's number. The call rang twice before Lisa picked up. "Dana," she said, her voice bright. "Did you make a decision?" Dana hesitated, her heart pounding. "Tell them I'll do it," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "But I'm not going to talk about the money. I want to focus on the note, on what it meant." Lisa was silent for a moment, Then she let out a soft laugh. "I knew you'd do the right thing," she said warmly. "I'll let them know. They'll send a car to pick you up tomorrow morning." Dana hung up, her chest tightening with a mix of fear and determination. She didn't know what she was going to say or how she was going to get through the interview without falling apart, but she knew one thing for sure. She wanted people to understand the importance of the words Barron had written. The money had been generous, but it was the message that had changed everything. The next morning, Dana found herself sitting on the couch of a brightly lit studio, her hands folded nervously in her lap. The host, a polished woman with a warm smile, leaned forward, her voice soft and encouraging. "Dana, you've been in the spotlight these past few days because of something very unexpected, a note and a tip from Barron Trump. Can you tell us how it felt when you first read it?" Dana took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Honestly," she began, her voice wavering slightly, "it caught me off guard. It wasn't about the money. It was what he wrote. I've been going through a tough time, and those words, they meant more than I can explain." The host nodded, her expression understanding. The note said, "Your kindness and hard work don't go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." What do you think he meant by that? Dana glanced at the camera, her heart pounding. It felt like she was speaking directly to every person watching. "I think he meant that we all go through struggles," she said quietly. "No matter who we are, no matter where we come from. And sometimes, when you're at your lowest, the smallest act of kindness can change everything. It reminds you that someone sees you, that you're not alone." The studio fell silent for a beat, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The host smiled warmly. "That's a beautiful message," she said. "Dana, is there anything you'd like to say to Barron if he's watching?" Dana's voice wavered, but she smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Just thank you," she said softly. "Not for the money, but for seeing me, for reminding me to hold on to hope. You made more of a difference than you know." When the interview aired later that day, Dana didn't look at her phone. She didn't check the comments or the headlines. Instead, she focused on the quiet relief she felt for having shared her truth. For the first time in days, she felt lighter, as if a weight she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying had finally lifted. And when she walked into the cafe the next morning, the folded note was still safely tucked in her wallet, a constant reminder that kindness, no matter how small, could change everything. The morning after the interview, Dana woke up to a rare feeling of peace. The sunlight filtered through her curtains, casting a warm glow over her small apartment. For the first time in days, the buzz of her phone didn't immediately send her into a spiral of dread. Instead, she reached for it with a calmness she hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. The messages and notifications were still pouring in, but now they felt different. She scrolled through a few of them, her chest tightening as she read the words of strangers who had been touched by her story. "Your words really spoke to me. Thank you for reminding us that kindness still matters. Dana, your story gave me hope during a tough time. Thank you for sharing it. Barron's note was beautiful, but your strength is what made this story so powerful." Dana's breath hitched as she realized how far the story had reached. It wasn't just about her anymore, or even Barron. It had become something bigger, a beacon of hope for people who needed to believe in the power of kindness. She smiled faintly, her fingers brushing over the pocket of her bag where the note still rested. When she arrived at the cafe, the atmosphere had changed in ways she couldn't have anticipated. Customers greeted her with warm smiles and kind words, and even the regulars who had always seemed glued to their phones looked up to thank her as she brought their orders. Some left notes scribbled on napkins, small but heartfelt messages of encouragement. Others tipped a little more than usual, their gestures quiet but sincere. Dana's co-workers, too, seemed to view her differently. not as a waitress struggling to make ends meet, but as someone who had become a symbol of resilience and hope. Lisa, her manager, pulled her aside midway through the shift. "You know," she said with a soft smile, "I've been here a long time, and I've seen a lot of people come and go. But you've reminded us all of something important. Kindness matters, no matter what." Dana blinked back tears, her voice catching as she replied, "I didn't do anything special, Lisa. I just—" Lisa cut her off gently. "You were yourself, Dana, and that's enough." As the days turned into weeks, the story's impact continued to ripple outward. The cafe became busier than ever, drawing customers who wanted to be part of the place where the now famous note had been written. But it wasn't just the business that grew. It was the spirit of the place. People lingered longer, their conversations filled with warmth and connection. It was as if Dana's story had reminded everyone of something they'd forgotten: the power of small gestures to make a big difference. Dana, however, stayed grounded. She kept Barron's note tucked in her wallet, a quiet reminder of the moment that had changed everything. It wasn't about the money, though the tip had undoubtedly helped her catch up on bills and buy her mom's much-needed medication. It was about the words, about being seen and reminded that brighter days were possible. One afternoon, as she wiped down a table near the window, a young woman approached her hesitantly. "Hi," the woman said, her voice soft. "I just wanted to say thank you." Dana looked up, startled. "For what?" she asked, genuinely confused. The woman smiled, her eyes glistening. "For sharing your story. I've been going through a rough time, and it helped me remember that things can get better, that people still care." Dana's chest tightened, and she felt the familiar sting of tears threatening to fall. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice steady. "That means more than you know." As the woman left, Dana stood there for a moment, her heart full. She hadn't realized how much her story had resonated with people, how much it had reminded them, and herself, that kindness could spark hope even in the darkest times. The attention eventually began to fade, replaced by new stories and headlines. The reporters stopped coming, the buzz around the cafe quieted, and life slowly returned to normal. But for Dana, something had shifted permanently. She carried herself differently now, her steps a little lighter, her interactions with customers a little warmer. She'd learned to embrace the quiet power of connection, of being present and kind, even when the world felt heavy. One evening, after her shift, Dana sat on the subway with Barron's note in her hands. She traced the words with her fingers, reading them once more. "Your kindness and hard work don't go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." She whispered the final line to herself, a small smile tugging at her lips. Brighter days had come, not because her struggles had magically disappeared, but because she'd been reminded that she wasn't alone, that someone had seen her, acknowledged her, and extended a hand when she needed it most. That night, Dana slid the note back into her wallet, where it would stay for years to come. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a symbol of hope, of kindness, and of the power of small acts to change a life. As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Dana thought about the ripple effect the note had created. Barron's simple gesture had inspired countless others to act with compassion, to reach out, and to remind the people around them that they mattered. It had shown the world that kindness, no matter how small, could echo far beyond its original moment. And for Dana, it had reminded her of something she'd almost forgotten. Brighter days weren't just coming. They were already here,